It started with a single envelope. Plain, unmarked, left quietly on a mahogany desk inside Kensington Palace. But what it contained would rewrite royal history. Inside was a letter sealed with wax and the faint scent of old paper, attached to a lab report stamped confidential. When Prince William opened it, he expected political nonsense or another tabloid leak. Instead, he saw 3 words that shattered everything he thought he knew about his family. Confirmed DNA match. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For a long time, he couldn't move. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound in the room. Outside, the palace gardens were bright and calm, a picture of British perfection. Inside, a prince's world was collapsing in silence. Because this wasn't just any DNA test, it was tied to his mother, to Princess Diana, to the one woman who'd lived, loved, and died under the world's harshest spotlight, carrying secrets she never had the chance to reveal. Now, one of those secrets had clawed its way back to the surface. Let's ask the question that no royal fan ever dared to say aloud. What if Diana had another child, one the palace never acknowledged? A child raised far away, hidden not by chance but by design? What if the truth wasn't buried with her, but waiting all these years for someone brave enough, or broken enough, to face it? It sounds impossible, doesn't it? After all, how could the most photographed woman on earth conceal something as monumental as a pregnancy? Yet history is full of impossibilities that later became undeniable. For decades, whispers followed Diana. Rumors of clandestine meetings, coded letters, sudden trips, and quiet tears behind palace doors. Some dismissed them as gossip. Others insisted she was trying to leave behind a trail of clues. Maybe she was. Maybe she knew that one day, someone would find the pieces and put them together. And that someone turned out to be her son. The royal family has always thrived on silence. It's their armor, their protection, their curse. But silence is fragile when truth starts to bleed through the cracks. William had been raised to protect the institution above all else, to smile when he wanted to scream, to obey when he wanted to question. But this time, he couldn't ignore what he'd found. Because what he held in his hands didn't just concern him. It was about his mother's legacy, his brother's identity, and a shadow sibling who had lived a life none of them knew existed. Let's rewind. Imagine Diana, years before that tragic night in Paris, standing in her Kensington Palace bedroom, looking out the window at the rain. She's 27. Heartbroken. Betrayed. The marriage that was supposed to define her has instead destroyed her peace. But despite everything, she still believed in love. Still believed in doing good. Still believed in life beyond the palace walls. And maybe, just maybe, she believed in starting over. There are diary entries, now authenticated by her handwriting experts, where she wrote cryptically about a second chance and a secret that must be kept safe. At the time, no one paid much attention. But with what William discovered, those words take on new meaning. Because if Diana really did have another child, the implications are staggering. A royal heir raised in hiding. A secret kept for decades. A legacy of compassion and rebellion, alive in someone the world doesn't even know exists. But how did we get here? How did a DNA report land on William's desk decades later, connecting the dots between one of the most beloved figures in modern history and a secret that could shake the monarchy to its core? That's the story we're about to uncover. A story of betrayal, cover-ups, and an unbreakable maternal bond that refused to die. It began not with gossip, but with evidence. A piece of hair recovered from one of Diana's old hairbrushes, stored, ironically, as a keepsake by one of her former staff members. Years later, when an investigative journalist got hold of it, curiosity turned into obsession. She'd been following strange rumors about a British-born child of mystery, adopted in secret, and now living abroad. When she compared DNA traces, the result was clear as daylight. It matched the maternal line of Princess Diana of Wales. Impossible, right? The royal household dismissed it instantly. Fabricated nonsense, they called it. But the journalist persisted. And when William found out the DNA had been cross-tested at 2 independent European labs, both confirming the same maternal markers, he demanded the results himself. That's when the envelope arrived. No gossip, no speculation, just scientific truth. Still, William didn't want to believe it. How could his mother, his sainted mother, have carried a secret like that to her grave? Yet the more he looked, the more it made sense. The strange letters she wrote before her death. The conversations with her friends about having someone to protect when I'm gone. The hidden accounts. The trips no royal calendar ever documented. It wasn't just rumor anymore. It was evidence, waiting to be seen. Now, pause for a moment. Picture yourself in his place. You've lived your whole life under the shadow of cameras and crowns, trained to be the future king. Then, suddenly, a piece of paper tells you your mother lived an entirely different life behind the curtain, and that you're not her only son. What would you do? Burn it? Deny it? Or search for the truth no matter the cost? William chose the last one, because he knew his mother better than anyone else. He remembered her voice, the way she'd whisper, "Always be true to yourself, even when it hurts." And for the first time, those words weren't about the press or the monarchy. They were about her, about what she left behind. This wasn't the kind of story the palace could control. It wasn't about duty, it was about DNA. And DNA doesn't lie. As the investigation deepened, new evidence began surfacing. Letters from Diana's inner circle, sealed since 1997. Hidden recordings where she hinted at a love that had to be protected. An unregistered hospital visit in 1989 that had mysteriously disappeared from royal records. All of it painted a haunting picture. That somewhere in the world, there might be someone carrying her smile, her eyes, her compassion, and her pain. And as William pieced it together, something inside him began to break. Because this wasn't just about uncovering his mother's past. It was about rediscovering who she really was. The world had seen the princess. He was finally seeing the woman. Vulnerable, human, brave enough to defy a system built on perfection. But every truth has a cost. The moment he shared what he'd found with the royal advisors, panic erupted behind closed doors. Meetings were held. Phone calls were made. Legal teams drafted containment strategies. Because this kind of revelation doesn't just challenge history, it threatens power. And the monarchy cannot survive without control of its narrative. Still, William couldn't bury it. Not this time. Because this wasn't just about protecting the crown. It was about honoring his mother's truth. And maybe, in some strange way, it was about redemption. For her. For him. For all of them. When word reached Prince Harry, sources say his reaction was explosive. He felt betrayed, confused, and convinced the palace was manipulating William. But when he saw the report himself, even his anger fell silent. Two brothers, once divided by the public and press, now found themselves united in disbelief and grief. Yet there was one more thing inside that envelope. Something that made William tremble. A single note, written in his mother's looping script, faded but unmistakable. It read, "Tell him I love him, too." Tell who? That's the question that kept him awake for nights. Who was the him Diana meant? The mystery child? A love she lost? A secret ally? No one could say. But the handwriting was hers, and the words were real. From that moment on, William couldn't rest. He began searching, quietly, carefully, every hidden archive, every hospital record, every person who might have known something about Diana's final months. And with every step, the picture became clearer. Someone had been living in the shadows, someone whose existence had been carefully erased, someone who might just hold the missing piece to Diana's unfinished story. And so here we are. Decades after a crash in Paris that ended a fairy tale, her spirit still stirs the world. And now, perhaps for the first time, we may finally understand why she was so desperate to escape the palace's grip, because she wasn't running from fame. She was running to protect a life the monarchy could never accept. But who is this hidden sibling? Where have they been all these years? And what connection do they have to the people Diana trusted most? The answers are more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Because once the truth started coming out, it didn't just shake the crown, it nearly broke it. And at the center of it all stands Prince William, the boy who grew up chasing his mother's memory, now forced to confront the secret she never meant for him to find. His tears weren't just for her. They were for everything she'd endured to keep her truth alive. And as the storm brews once again over Buckingham Palace, one thing is certain: Diana's final secret didn't die with her. It was waiting to be discovered. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What would you do if an envelope on your desk could destroy everything you thought you knew about your life? Would you open it, or pretend it didn't exist? That was the question Prince William faced one quiet morning inside Kensington Palace. The morning sun cut through the tall windows, spilling gold across the oak-paneled study. The air smelled faintly of old books, ink, and polished wood. It should have been peaceful, but that single envelope on his desk changed the atmosphere entirely. It wasn't addressed to anyone. No royal seal. No courier markings. Just cream-colored paper and the faintest smudge, as if someone had touched it with trembling fingers. He stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to touch it. In the palace, every letter meant something. A briefing from the Foreign Office. A memo from the security team. A personal note from the king. But this? It didn't belong to any of those categories. Something about it felt personal, almost haunting. When he finally reached out and broke the seal, he wasn't prepared for what fell out. A neatly folded letter, handwritten in ink that had slightly faded with time, and another sheet attached to it. A lab report stamped private. For a moment, he thought it was some sort of prank. The royal family lived under constant threat of leaks, forgeries, conspiracy theories. But this felt different. The paper was thick, expensive. The handwriting was elegant, unmistakably feminine. He unfolded the letter slowly, his eyes scanning the top line. "My darling boy," it began. The handwriting hit him like a punch. It was his mother's. He knew every loop of those letters, every slant of that pen. He'd seen it on birthday cards, little notes she'd leave under his pillow when he was small, and in the signatures she'd scrawled across charity letters. But this was dated months after her death. He blinked hard, his heart hammering in his chest. How could that be? He read on. The letter spoke of love, protection, and the need to keep something safe. The tone was anxious, almost desperate. It hinted at someone precious, someone outside the line of danger. And then the final words that made his throat tighten. "If you ever find this, please remember, I did it for love." He froze. For love? For who? The attached report slipped from his fingers and drifted to the floor. It landed face up, revealing words that made the air leave his lungs. DNA analysis result. Confirmed match. Maternal lineage. Princess Diana Spencer. He read it again and again, but every repetition only made it more real. Someone out there shared his mother's DNA, someone alive. He stumbled back from the desk and sat heavily in the armchair. His pulse thudded in his ears. He felt sick, dizzy. The report listed a second sample, identified only by an anonymous code, subject 47A. Whoever they were, their genetic markers matched Diana's perfectly. He whispered under his breath, almost afraid of his own voice. This can't be real. But it was. The document wasn't from a tabloid. It wasn't some random conspiracy blog. It was from a private European genetics institute, one that had also handled royal ancestry research in the past. The date was recent. The signature on the bottom wasn't just anyone's. It was a well-known geneticist who had worked quietly for the royal family for decades. Someone who wouldn't dare fake something like this. He reached for the phone to call his private secretary, then stopped. No, not yet. He needed to understand what this meant before anyone else did. He turned the envelope over, searching for clues. There was no return address. But inside the flap, in the faintest pencil marks, were 3 words, from her friend. Who would dare? Who would even have access to something like this? His mind spun through names. Paul Burrell, her former butler. Dr. Hasnat Khan, the surgeon she once loved. Maybe someone from her staff. But each possibility only made things more complicated. He looked back at the report. Beneath the confirmation line, there was another section labeled Relationship Probability, 99.98% match to the Spencer maternal genome. His eyes trailed further down. Predicted relation, half-sibling, same mother, different father. Half-sibling. The word struck him like lightning. He dropped the papers to the floor and pressed his hands over his face. This couldn't be happening. His mother, Princess Diana, had another child, raised in hiding. He stood and began pacing. Every sound in the room seemed amplified. The ticking clock, the rustle of paper, the distant footsteps of palace staff. He couldn't think straight. His mind flooded with flashes of memory. His mother's laugh, her perfume, the way she'd always hold his face and whisper, "You and Harry, my life's 2 miracles." Had she been hiding a third? He remembered something else, an overheard conversation between palace staff when he was younger. Something about a trip Diana took to France, unaccompanied, during a brief separation from Charles. At the time, it was dismissed as charity work. But now it seemed like a missing piece. He picked up the letter again. If you ever find this, please remember, I did it for love. Love for whom? A child she couldn't protect within the palace walls. A person the monarchy would never accept? He leaned back against the desk, exhaling shakily. Maybe she had been pregnant. Maybe she had gone somewhere safe. Maybe she had given birth quietly, under an assumed name, and arranged for the child to be raised far away from royal scrutiny. It sounded like fiction, but this was Diana. She'd been unpredictable, brave, and desperate for a normal life. And suddenly, it wasn't so impossible. He opened the lab file again and noticed something strange. The report included limited information about subject 47A. Only an age range, mid-30s, and a note. Currently residing in New South Wales, Australia. Australia. That word caught him off guard. Diana had visited Australia multiple times, both officially and privately. During one of those trips in 1989, she had disappeared from the itinerary for nearly 2 days. The palace had explained it as private rest, but her security team later admitted they were given contradictory instructions. Was that when it happened? William's mind raced. If the child was born around that time, they'd be roughly 35 or 36 now. That matched the report perfectly. He looked out the window at the palace gardens. The trees swayed gently, the sky was clear, and yet his world felt like it had tilted on its axis. He wanted to talk to Harry, but he couldn't, not yet. Harry was impulsive, emotional. If he reacted badly, it could explode before William even understood what they were dealing with. He picked up the letter again and noticed a faint indentation beneath the ink, as if someone had written it in haste, pressing too hard. He tilted the page toward the light and saw faint words beneath the lines. They read, "Find Dr. K." Dr. K? The name echoed in his mind. Could it be Dr. Hasnat Khan, Diana's former lover? The man she once called the love of my life? He had vanished from public view after her death, returning quietly to his medical practice. If anyone could know the truth, it was him. William reached for his phone again, but stopped halfway. He needed to confirm the source of the envelope first. If this was planted, if it was some elaborate manipulation, contacting anyone could make it worse. He sat back down and opened his laptop, searching for the Genetics Institute listed on the document. It existed. Real website. Real address in Geneva. He clicked through the staff list, and there it was. The same doctor's signature from the report. Legitimate. So it was real. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. How was he supposed to process this? How was he supposed to carry something like this alone? He imagined how his grandmother would react. Queen Elizabeth had lived through scandal after scandal. But this was beyond even her endurance. She had fought her entire life to preserve the monarchy's mystique. A hidden royal child would dismantle decades of carefully built stability. He whispered to himself, "Mom, what did you do?" And somewhere, deep down, a small part of him admired her. Because if this was true, she hadn't done it out of recklessness. She'd done it to protect someone. Someone the palace might have destroyed. The next morning, he didn't sleep. He watched the sunrise from his window, the sky bleeding from gray to gold. He decided he needed to know more, quietly, without the palace's involvement. He called an old friend, a former investigator who'd once worked on royal security detail. The man owed him a favor. "I need you to find the source of a delivery," William said simply. The man hesitated. "Are we talking internal or external, sir?" "International. Geneva." There was a long pause. "Understood. I'll get back to you." William hung up. His hands trembled. For the first time in years, he felt like that boy again. The one standing behind his mother's coffin, the cameras capturing every tear, the world watching him learn what grief truly meant. And now, decades later, grief had returned. But this time, it carried questions instead of closure. By evening, he received a call back. The investigator's voice was tight. "Sir, I traced the courier. The package came from Switzerland, yes, but the sender used an old diplomatic channel. One that hasn't been active since 1997. William froze. 1997? Yes, sir. The same year your mother passed away. The line went silent. Somehow, the envelope had been sent using a route that no longer existed. One that only royal or government personnel had access to back then. But someone had revived it just to send this. Who had clearance for that channel? William asked quietly. The investigator hesitated. Only senior palace staff and members of her security detail. But they're all gone or retired. William's heart pounded. Not all, he whispered. He remembered one name. Alan, one of Diana's former protection officers, who had vanished from public service shortly after her death. He knew what he had to do next. He had to find Alan. He hung up, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles went white. The walls of the palace seemed to close in around him. Every portrait of his ancestors stared down in silent judgment. He didn't care. He slipped the envelope and its contents into a locked drawer, then left the study without another word. Outside, the palace courtyard gleamed under the cold light of dawn. The world still saw him as the composed future king. But inside, he was just a son chasing the last whispers of his mother's truth. And as the palace gates closed behind him, one thought echoed louder than all the rest. If she had another child, where were they now? What he didn't know yet was that the search for that answer would uncover something far darker, something that would make even the most loyal royal staff question everything they'd sworn to protect. And what came next would change everything. She had tried to tell them. Not the press, not the public, not the men in gray suits who followed her every move. No, Diana had tried to tell her sons. Not with words, but with glances, pauses, and those strange late-night stories she used to whisper when the cameras were off and the world was asleep. Always listen to your heart, she'd tell them, running her fingers through William's hair. Because sometimes the truth can't speak, it hides. Back then, William thought it was just another one of her poetic ways of warning them about the press. But now, years later, sitting in the dim glow of his study with that envelope burned into his mind, he realized something terrifying. She wasn't warning them about tabloids. She was warning them about secrets, her own. For days after finding the letter, William barely slept. He kept hearing her voice in his head, the way she'd say things that didn't make sense until much later. "They'll never let me tell my story," she once confessed in her famous BBC interview. But what if that wasn't about her divorce or her love life? What if she meant something else entirely? It was as if she'd buried breadcrumbs, hoping one day her sons would follow them. Let's go back for a moment. The late 1980s. Diana was at her most radiant and most trapped. She was adored by millions, yet suffocating behind palace walls. She was a global icon of compassion, yet privately she was lonely, paranoid, desperate for meaning. She spent nights pacing her Kensington Palace apartment, writing in her diary, and making tapes that she entrusted to close friends and biographers. Most of those tapes have never been released. But among the few that have, certain lines stand out, lines that feel different once you know what William discovered. In one, her voice trembles as she says, "There are things they can't ever take from me. I've made sure of that." Made sure of what? At the time, commentators assumed she was referring to her children's love. But that phrase, "made sure," feels deliberate. Almost like she'd taken action, hidden something, protected someone. One of her friends, Simone Simmons, later revealed that Diana would sometimes speak cryptically about a child who would live free. At the time, Simone thought Diana was speaking metaphorically, referring to William and Harry someday escaping the royal cage. But the phrasing was odd. "Not them," Diana once said softly. He'll never wear a crown, and that's the point. He'll never wear a crown." It sounds like an offhand comment, but it now feels like a confession. William couldn't ignore it anymore. He asked his private team to quietly retrieve every transcript, tape, and handwritten note left from his mother's estate. Most of it was already archived for historical preservation, but a few pieces were locked in private storage under royal classification, off-limits even to him. That was the first time he realized just how many walls his own family had built around his mother's truth. One archivist, a woman who had worked for the family for over 30 years, agreed to meet him in private. She looked nervous, clutching a worn leather folder. "There were things your mother asked us to store separately," she said quietly. "Personal things. We never opened them. The order came directly from your grandmother." William nodded slowly. "I need to see them." Inside were notes, hundreds of them, written on scraps of stationery, in margins of old books, on hotel notepads. Her thoughts poured out in fragments. "They lied again today. He knows too much. I saw him. A promise I'll keep no matter what." But there was one that stopped him cold. It was dated July 1990, right after one of her solo trips abroad. The handwriting was rushed, uneven. It read, "They must never find him. The world isn't safe for truth." He reread the words again and again. Find him, not find out, not find it. Her language was precise. She was talking about a person. The archivist looked uneasy. "Sir, we always assumed these were emotional entries, not literal." "Maybe that's what they wanted you to think," he replied quietly. From that day, William stopped thinking of it as a theory. He started thinking of it as a mission. He needed answers. He reached out to one of his mother's oldest confidants, a retired journalist named Andrew Morton, who had written Diana's tell-all biography based on her secret tapes. Morton had promised never to reveal some parts of her story, but when William asked, he couldn't say no. They met in a discreet London cafe, away from prying eyes. Morton arrived with a briefcase and the same haunted look he had back in the early 90s when the book caused a media earthquake. "I always knew there was more," Morton said, sipping his tea. "She would stop recording mid-sentence sometimes, like she was scared someone might be listening." "Do you think she was hiding something specific?" William asked. Morton hesitated. "There was one part she made me delete. She said, 'This isn't about them, it's about him.' When I asked who him was, she just smiled and said, 'You'll know one day. You'll know one day.'" The words sent a chill down William's spine. He asked Morton if there was any mention of names, places, anything that might help. The journalist shook his head. "She mentioned a friend in France. A woman she trusted completely. Said she could keep anything safe." William leaned forward. "Do you know who she meant?" Morton hesitated again. "I think she meant a nurse. Someone connected to a private clinic near Paris. But the records vanished after 1997. The timing hit him hard. The same year Diana died. The same city. That night, William listened again to his mother's voice on those old tapes. The static crackled, the audio quality terrible, but her words were unmistakable. "I wish people would let me tell the whole truth. But they wouldn't believe me even if I did." He paused the tape and whispered, "I believe you, Mom. But if this was true, if she really had a hidden child, why did she never tell anyone directly? Not even her closest friends, not her sons, not the press she often used to send coded messages. What was she so afraid of?" The answer might lie in the institution itself. The royal system is built on bloodlines, heritage, control. A child outside that framework isn't just scandal, it's an existential threat. If a hidden heir existed, it would rewrite the line of succession. That's not gossip. That's history rewritten. William realized the gravity of it. His own position as heir could be questioned if someone else shared his mother's blood and a trace of royal connection. But he didn't care about the crown anymore. He cared about the truth. And the deeper he looked, the stranger it got. An old member of Diana's staff, a housekeeper named Elsie, now living quietly in Scotland, wrote him a letter after hearing rumors that he was looking into private matters. Her note was short but startling. "There was a night in 1989 when the princess dismissed the entire household. Said she needed privacy for a medical visit. I never saw her leave, but the next morning she looked exhausted, and her doctor wasn't one we recognized. A private medical visit. Unfamiliar doctor. A missing record. The same year the hidden DNA subject was likely born. Coincidence? Maybe. But William didn't believe in coincidences anymore. He began tracing her movements during that period. Trips to France, Switzerland, and Australia, all with unexplained gaps in her schedule. Each time, the palace press office brushed them off as private rest or retreats. But one trip in particular stood out. A 3-day disappearance in France, just outside Paris, where she stayed with a family friend. No records, no photos, no official statement. When William asked the palace archivist for the itinerary from that trip, he was told it had been misplaced. Misplaced, he repeated, his jaw tightening. Or destroyed. The archivist said nothing. At this point, William began to sense resistance, not from outsiders, but from inside the royal machine itself. He'd been raised to protect it, but now the machine was turning against him, brick by brick. Late one evening, he walked through the quiet halls of Kensington Palace and found himself in his mother's old apartments, preserved, almost untouched. Her perfume still faintly lingered in the curtains. Her photos were still neatly arranged on the desk. And there, on a shelf, was a small wooden box he'd never noticed before. It was locked. He fetched a spare key kept in storage and opened it. Inside were a few personal trinkets, a rosary, a folded note, and an old cassette tape labeled Private 1990. He took the tape, loaded it into a dusty recorder, and pressed play. Diana's voice filled the room, fragile, trembling, but unmistakably hers. "If you're hearing this," she said softly, "then they've found me, or I'm gone. There are things I did they'll never understand. I had to protect someone. Please, forgive me." The recording cut off abruptly. William sat in stunned silence. "Forgive me? Protect someone?" The words echoed in his mind. He rewound it again, playing it over and over, searching for background noise, context, anything. In the faint hum behind her voice, he thought he heard the distant sounds of traffic, maybe a car horn, and something like hospital machinery. It wasn't a palace. It was somewhere else entirely. That night, he couldn't sleep. He went out for a walk, hoodie pulled low, guards trailing discreetly behind. London's streets were quiet, and for the first time, he felt small again, like the child who had lost his mother too soon. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "Mom, what were you trying to tell us?" And somewhere, in the silence, he could almost hear her voice again. "They'll never let me tell my story." But maybe, just maybe, her story was finally about to be told. Because William had found something that the palace had missed all these years, a thread leading straight to Paris. And once he followed it, the truth about Diana's final secret would begin to unravel in ways no one could stop. What waited there would force him to question not only his mother's past, but the entire foundation of the royal family itself. And the first clue was waiting inside a Paris vault. What if the truth about Princess Diana wasn't buried in Westminster Abbey, but hidden beneath the streets of Paris? That question haunted Prince William as his plane touched down in France under the cover of darkness. He wasn't here as the Duke of Cambridge or as the heir to the British throne. He came as a son, one chasing the echo of a mother who refused to be silenced. He traveled with no entourage, no public statement, no security convoy, just one trusted companion. His late mother's former investigator, now retired, who had helped her keep certain affairs private long before the tabloids learned her name. They drove through the rain to a quiet district near the Seine, a world away from the glittering landmarks tourists adored. The streets were narrow, lined with old bookshops, locksmiths, and shuttered cafes. At the end of the alley stood a small private banking facility that looked like any other. But beneath it lay one of Paris's most secure vault networks, a place used by politicians, diplomats, and yes, even royals, to store secrets that couldn't survive daylight. William's heart pounded as the elevator descended into the vault. The hum of machinery echoed in the steel corridor. The air smelled of metal and dust, sterile, old, forgotten. The attendant, a discreet older man, glanced at the prince with wary eyes but said nothing. He led them to a single safe deposit box, number 237, the same number that appeared in one of Diana's old letters discovered weeks earlier. The man turned the key, stepped back, and nodded. "Take as long as you wish, monsieur." When the door swung open, it revealed a small velvet pouch, sealed with wax. William reached in and lifted it gently. The seal was stamped with an emblem he hadn't seen in years, a private crest Diana used for her personal correspondence. The wax was cracked, but intact enough to prove authenticity. He exhaled shakily. She really did this. Inside the pouch was a thin leather-bound diary. The pages were brittle with age, the ink faded, but her handwriting was unmistakable, those loops and flourishes that danced across every letter. He turned the first page, and there it was, her familiar tone, candid and confessional, as if she were speaking directly to him. April 1989, it began. "I've done something that will never be understood. I did it because love demanded it. They'd call it madness, but it was the only way." William's throat tightened. He flipped through the next few pages, each more cryptic than the last. She spoke of betrayal, of being watched, of a decision that must remain secret. She wrote about a life I can't protect inside these walls, and a promise made in France. France. The word kept appearing again and again. France knows my truth. He is safe here. My light in France. His companion, the investigator, leaned in. "This wasn't written for publication," he murmured. "She meant this to be found one day." William nodded silently, his hands trembling as he reached a section marked with a ribbon. Inside was a photograph, slightly faded, taken on old Polaroid film. It showed Diana standing in a sunlit garden, smiling. In her arms was a baby. The baby's face was partially turned away, but what struck William wasn't the child. It was Diana herself. She looked serene, radiant, happy in a way he hadn't seen since he was very small. He turned the photo over. On the back, in her handwriting, was a single line, "For when the time is right." He didn't speak for nearly a minute. The silence was heavy, pressing against his chest. The investigator said nothing either. There was nothing to say. Then, further in the diary, came an entry dated just weeks before her Paris accident in 1997. "I feel it closing in. They'll never let me reveal the truth. I've made arrangements. If anything happens to me, the vault will remain sealed until one of my sons asks for it. Only then will he understand." William closed the book, his hands shaking. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew something was coming." The investigator nodded grimly. She was always 10 steps ahead of them. She must have trusted the French legal system to protect whatever she left here. William looked around the small vault room. So she left all of this diary, this photo, for us to find. But why now? Who sent that envelope? The investigator frowned. If the vault was linked to her estate, the French authorities would have kept it sealed until official request. Unless, he hesitated, unless someone else with access triggered the release. William frowned. Someone like who? The man met his eyes. Someone she named as executor of her private affairs. Someone we don't know about yet. That night, William and the investigator took the diary to a secure hotel room. He spent hours reading every page. It wasn't just a mother's reflections. It was a coded confession. A breadcrumb trail pointing to a love affair, a hidden pregnancy, and a network of people who helped her keep it secret. One passage stood out. "He's safe where the light meets the sea. His name means peace. I couldn't bear to let them break another heart." William whispered the words aloud. "Where the light meets the sea." The investigator pulled out a map. Could that mean the coast? Maybe the south of France? William thought about it. No. She used to call Sydney her place of peace. She said the light there was different. Australia again. It connected perfectly with the lab report. As dawn broke over Paris, William sat on the balcony, the diary in his lap. The city was waking up, the sound of traffic rising like distant waves. He felt the weight of generations pressing on him. His grandmother's iron control, his father's cold detachment, the endless royal image polished to perfection. But beneath all that was his mother's heart, wild and defiant, daring to love outside the rules. For the first time, he realized she had never been reckless. She'd been strategic. Maybe she knew this day would come. He turned one final page of the diary. It contained a letter addressed simply to my beloved sons. "I hope when you read this, you'll understand that my choices came from love, not betrayal. You were my light, but there was another life I couldn't protect in your world. Forgive me if the truth hurts, but freedom demands it. Freedom demands it." He closed the diary and pressed it against his chest. The tears came quietly, not from confusion, but from understanding. His mother had never lied. She'd just never been allowed to tell the whole truth. Still, one question remained. Who was the child in the photograph? And where were they now? As they prepared to leave the vault, the attendant returned with an envelope. "This was stored alongside the diary, monsieur. It was addressed to be given upon retrieval." William took it. Inside was a slip of paper with only one line. "Find the midwife. She knows." The handwriting wasn't his mother's. It was someone else's, someone still alive. William looked up sharply at his companion. "She had help." The investigator nodded. "And whoever wrote this, they're telling you where to look next." William tucked the note into his jacket. "Then that's where we start." He didn't know yet that this midwife had been living under a new name for decades, or that finding her would expose the people who had kept this secret buried for 30 years. Because sometimes, the truth isn't buried in a coffin. It's living quietly in the shadows, waiting to be found. And what William was about to uncover would tear open the very heart of the royal institution. But first, he had to find the woman who helped deliver the secret Diana died protecting. Love. It's a word that changed the course of Diana's life, and in the end, it may have been the reason she risked everything. But what if that love story wasn't the one the world thought it knew? What if there was another man, a man outside the palace walls, beyond royal protocol, whose presence could explain everything William had just discovered? As William sat in his private office, the Paris diary opened beside him. He couldn't stop replaying one name in his mind. Dr. Hasnat Khan, the quiet, soft-spoken heart surgeon who had captured Diana's heart when she was at her most broken. Many had called him the love of her life. Even she had admitted it, describing him in her recordings as Mr. Wonderful. But what the world didn't know was how far that love had gone, or what it had cost her. William picked up the diary again, reading through the section dated 1990 to 1991. Diana wrote of a man who made me feel human again, someone she could trust with everything. She mentioned secret meetings, nights spent in quiet London flats, laughter away from cameras. And between the lines, in her graceful yet guarded prose, was a kind of desperation. He gives me peace, but peace is dangerous here. They would never allow it. Was she talking about Hasnat? Or someone else entirely? William decided to find out. Through discreet channels, he tracked down the elusive doctor who had avoided public life for decades. He was still in London, working at a private hospital, his name absent from any media mention. Reaching him was nearly impossible, but being Prince William opened doors that no one else could. The meeting was arranged in secret, in a small private garden behind an old church in Chelsea. The doctor arrived wearing a dark coat, his eyes weary but kind. "Your Highness," he said softly. "It's been a long time." "Please," William said, his voice tense. "Call me William." There was silence between them for a long moment. The air felt heavy with ghosts. "I wouldn't have asked you here," William began, "if this wasn't important. I found something about my mother. Her diary, letters, and a DNA report." The doctor didn't flinch, but his eyes darkened. "So you found the truth." William froze. "You know about it?" Hasnat sighed, his breath fogging in the cold air. "She told me more than once that she feared her love would destroy her. But I never believed she'd act on it. Not until it was too late." "What do you mean, act on it?" The doctor looked away, his voice barely above a whisper. "She wanted a life beyond the monarchy. A normal life, with normal love. She talked about moving abroad, Australia, maybe. She said she wanted to raise a child where no one would call them royal." William's heart skipped a beat. "She said that?" "Yes," Hasnat said quietly. "But it wasn't about us. Not then. There was someone else. Before me." The words hit like a thunderclap. William's thoughts spiraled back to the diary, the dates, the missing months in 1989. "Before you," he repeated. "Yes," the doctor said. "Someone she met through her charity work. A foreign diplomat, I think. I never knew his name. She ended it before we met, but she carried guilt about it. Said she'd done something she couldn't undo. Something she couldn't undo." William felt the air leave his lungs. "You think she had a child?" The doctor looked down. "I can't say, but I know she was terrified. She said if the palace ever found out, they'd destroy him." "Destroy who?" "Whoever that child was." The words hung between them, echoing in the chill of the London morning. William's hands clenched. "Did you ever see anything, letters, photos?" "She showed me a picture once," Hasnat said after a long pause. "A baby. She said he's safe. I didn't ask. I wish I had." William felt his throat tighten. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Hasnat gave a sad smile. "Because she trusted me. And after she died, what good would it have done? The monarchy eats secrets for breakfast. I thought the truth had died with her." William looked away, his mind racing. He thought of the photo from the Paris vault, the baby in her arms, the line on the back, "For when the time is right." It wasn't just poetic. It was literal. She had left a timeline, a chain of clues leading him here. "Did she ever mention who helped her?" William asked. "Yes," Hasnat said. "A midwife. A woman from England who worked in France for a time. She was loyal to Diana until the end. I think she disappeared after the accident." William nodded slowly. "She's the one I'm looking for." Hasnat hesitated. "William, listen to me. You may think you want the truth, but once you find it, it will change everything. Your family, your country, your place in history. Are you ready for that?" William met his eyes. "I'm ready for whatever my mother wanted me to know." The doctor gave a slow, sorrowful nod. "Then I'll tell you one last thing. She said something to me once, something that never made sense until now." "What was it?" She said, "If they can't love me, I'll make sure love lives beyond them." William swallowed hard. Love beyond them. A hidden life. A hidden child. He thanked the doctor and left quietly, the words replaying in his mind like a haunting refrain. The wind picked up as he stepped into the street, cold and biting, but he didn't feel it. His thoughts were already far away, in France, in Australia, in the past. On his way back to the car, he passed a small newsstand. The front pages were filled with smiling photos of the royal family, his father, his wife, his children. The image of perfection. But all he could think of was how fragile that perfection really was, how one revelation could bring it crashing down. In the back seat, he pulled out his phone and called his investigator. "I found him," he said. "Dr. Khan. He confirmed what we suspected. There's someone else, and we need to find the midwife." The investigator's voice crackled over the line. "Already on it, sir. There's a woman in Toulouse, worked as a nurse in private maternity homes during the late 80s. Went by the name Marianne Dupont. No record after 1997. Send me everything you have." William hung up and stared out the window as London blurred past. His mother's laughter echoed faintly in his memory, the way she used to tilt her head, the way her eyes shone when she spoke about the future. She had wanted freedom, and the monarchy had called it rebellion. She had wanted love, and they'd called it scandal. But maybe, deep down, she wanted something simpler. A life untainted by crowns and cameras. A child untouched by titles. Now, that child was out there somewhere. And William knew he wouldn't rest until he found them. He didn't see the black car that had been following him since he left the garden. He didn't notice the man inside, speaking into a phone in clipped tones. "He's getting close. Inform the palace office. They'll want this contained." Contained. The same word that had been used every time Diana tried to speak the truth. The royal machine was stirring again, quietly, efficiently. Because if William found proof of this forbidden love, if he proved that his mother had defied the monarchy in the most human way possible, the entire institution could crumble. And somewhere, far from London, a woman named Marianne was about to realize that the secret she'd kept for 35 years was no longer safe. Because the prince was coming for answers. And what she knew could bring the monarchy to its knees. Every secret has a keeper. And in Diana's story, that keeper was a woman no one in the palace ever dared to mention again. Her name was Marianne Dupont, or at least, that was the name she'd used in France. For years, she worked quietly in private maternity clinics across Paris and later along the southern coast. Her record was spotless, her references impeccable. Then, in late 1997, her name simply disappeared. No resignation letter, no forwarding address, no trace of her life at all. For William, she was the missing link. If Diana had indeed given birth in secret, Marianne would have been there. She would have known everything, the place, the date, even the father's name. She was the bridge between rumor and proof. The trail began with an old employment file uncovered from a shuttered clinic near Toulouse. The documents showed a midwife on short-term assignment between March and June 1989, the exact period Diana's diary had gone blank. The address listed on Marianne's application was a small flat above a bakery, later sold to a mysterious British buyer in 1998. William knew he had to go there. He arrived in Toulouse under a false name, wearing a cap and sunglasses, accompanied only by his investigator and a discreet local contact. The bakery still existed, though its paint was peeling and its sign faded. The woman behind the counter, gray-haired and gentle, remembered Mary and instantly. "Ah, yes, the English nurse," she said, her accent lilting. She was very polite. Always wore blue. Loved tea. She stayed just upstairs. William leaned forward. "Do you know what happened to her?" The woman hesitated. "She left one morning, very suddenly. A man came for her. British, I think." She looked frightened. She didn't even collect her last wages. "A man. British. Frightened. Did she leave anything behind?" The baker nodded slowly. "Just a box. My husband put it in the attic. We never threw it away." They followed her upstairs to the narrow, dusty attic filled with old boxes and broken furniture. She rummaged through a pile until she pulled out a small metal tin, rusted around the edges. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with ribbon, a faded photograph, and a medical pass from a private maternity home near Bordeaux. The letters were written in English. Most were mundane, grocery lists, holiday wishes, but one, dated May 1989, stood out. "My dearest M," it began. "The patient has arrived safely. All has gone according to plan. She is in good spirits, but insists on no royal involvement. She fears discovery. The arrangements for relocation are set. We'll leave when she recovers. It was signed with initials, HK. Hasnat Khan. William's heart raced. He knew the doctor had worked in London at that time, but perhaps he'd helped arrange the medical care remotely. Diana had trusted him with everything, even before their romance. The letter proved she'd had medical assistance outside official channels, and someone had ensured it stayed hidden. He unfolded the photograph next. It showed two women standing outside what looked like a countryside clinic. One of them, unmistakably younger but clearly recognizable, was Marianne. The other woman had her back turned, wearing a scarf and sunglasses, but William would have known that posture anywhere. His mother, Diana. It wasn't a coincidence anymore. It was fact. He tucked the photo safely into his jacket as the investigator snapped digital copies. "We're getting closer," the man whispered. "If she left this behind, she didn't go willingly." Back in the car, William stared out the window as the French countryside blurred past. He thought about the note he'd found in the Paris vault. "Find the midwife. She knows." Someone else had known Marianne's importance. But who? They traced the Bordeaux clinic next. It had long since closed, the building repurposed as a storage facility. Yet, local records showed one peculiar entry. A British patient admitted under the alias Anna Spencer, age 28, receiving postnatal care in May 1989. No follow-up, no discharge form, no billing record. Anna Spencer. She hadn't even tried to hide the reference. William clenched his jaw. His mother had never been careless. She'd wanted the record to exist, hidden but traceable, like a message across time. When they interviewed a retired nurse from that clinic, the woman's hands trembled as she remembered. "There was something strange about that patient," she said. "Her bodyguards waited outside, but they were not French." She spoke softly, kindly. "And the baby was beautiful." She cried when she held him. "Her?" William asked carefully. "You're sure it was a boy?" The nurse nodded. "Yes, a boy. She called him my little light." My little light. The same phrase that appeared in Diana's diary. The investigator stepped forward. "Do you know what happened after she left?" "She left in the night," the nurse said, her eyes distant. "A man came for her. Not the father, I think. A protector. They drove away before dawn. After that, the director told us never to speak of it again." "Who was the director?" "Dr. Alain Fortier," she replied. "But he died years ago. Car crash. Very sudden. Another loose, inconveniently gone." That evening, as the sun dipped below the vineyards, William sat alone on the hotel balcony. The world outside looked peaceful, but inside his mind, everything was chaos. His mother hadn't been a victim of reckless romance. She'd been deliberate, strategic. She'd chosen people she could trust, made careful plans, and executed them quietly. The diary, the letter, the alias. All of it fit together like puzzle pieces forming a picture the monarchy had tried to erase. He thought of his father, King Charles, and the quiet rage that had simmered between them for years. Did he know? Did he suspect? And if he did, what had he done to keep it buried? The next morning brought more questions. The investigator received an encrypted message from a contact in Switzerland. Marion Dupont spotted in Geneva, 2004. Working under alias Marie Duhamel. Disappeared again 6 months later. Geneva, the same city where the DNA test had been processed. It wasn't coincidence. It was connection. William didn't waste a second. "Book a flight," he said. They arrived 2 days later, their search leading them to a quiet hospice just outside the city. The nurse on duty checked the register and froze. "Marie Duhamel," she whispered. "She worked here. But she's gone." "When?" William asked. "Last week." The words hit like ice. "Gone? As in dead?" The nurse hesitated. "No, monsieur. She left without notice. Said she was going home to England. But she didn't say where." William exchanged a grim look with his investigator. Someone was one step ahead of them, moving her, hiding her, or worse. He looked down at the registry sheet again. Next to her name was an address, hastily scribbled. It wasn't a full location, just 2 words, Cavendish Manor. He'd heard that name before. It was the old country estate once owned by a distant branch of the Spencer family. The same estate his mother had visited weeks before her fatal trip to Paris. He closed the ledger and whispered, "She's been there before." The investigator frowned. "You think she went back?" William nodded. "Not went back. Was taken." Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, low and heavy. The storm was coming, and so was the truth. Diana's midwife was no longer just a witness. She was the final living link to a secret the palace had buried deeper than any vault. And now, as William prepared to return to England, he knew this search was no longer a quiet investigation. It was a race against time, because someone else was hunting her too. Every royal mystery eventually leaves footprints. Some are faint, others buried under years of denial. But truth has a habit of resurfacing, especially when someone's been living in plain sight all along. When Prince William returned to England, the rain followed him home, as though even the sky understood the gravity of what he'd uncovered. The clouds hung low over London, heavy, brooding, mirroring his thoughts. He hadn't slept in days. His mind replayed the words over and over. She called him my little light. If Diana had indeed given birth to a child in secret, then that child was out there somewhere, alive, breathing, existing under another name, perhaps unaware of who they truly were. That thought haunted him more than anything. He sat in his study, maps and files spread across the table. The evidence was overwhelming now. The diary, the photos, the letters, the witness testimonies. Every clue pointed to one thing. A child born in France in 1989, relocated quietly under the supervision of Marion Dupont and her British protector. The boy had vanished from every record by the time he was 6 months old. William traced a line across the map, from Bordeaux to Geneva, then onward to Sydney. It couldn't be coincidence. Too many clues circled back to Australia. His mother's trips, her coded writings about the light and the sea, and now the missing midwife's alias leading to the same region. His investigator leaned over the table, eyes sharp. "Sir, I've run facial recognition comparisons using old photos of your mother and cross-matched them with public databases in Australia. There's one result worth your attention." William looked up, his pulse quickening. "Show me." The screen flickered, then displayed a man's face. Early 30s, tall, with unmistakable Spencer features, strong jawline, kind blue eyes, and a certain warmth that was both familiar and foreign. "His name is Daniel Reeves," the investigator said. "Born 1989 in Marseille. Adopted by an Australian couple who lived abroad at the time. He's now a doctor, cardiac surgery, Sydney General Hospital. A cardiac surgeon, just like Hasnat Khan." William stared at the photo for a long moment. His voice was barely a whisper. "He has her eyes." The investigator nodded. "And her smile. Have you verified the adoption records?" "We tried," the man said. "But there's a sealed file under international protection. The adoption was facilitated through a private diplomatic channel. British involvement confirmed. That means someone in the system knew about this and made sure it stayed buried." William's heart pounded. He'd expected answers, but not this. Not someone who mirrored Diana's compassion so perfectly. He stood and walked toward the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "If he's really her son," he said slowly, "then he's my brother. And he's out there saving lives, not even knowing his own story." The investigator hesitated. "Sir, before we take any further steps, you should know something. Someone's been monitoring your movements. We've detected surveillance, discreet, professional, possibly royal security." William turned sharply. "The palace? Most likely. They're nervous." He laughed bitterly. "Of course they are. Truth terrifies them more than scandal ever could." He paused, his voice lowering. "We have to meet him. But it has to be quiet. No press, no official contact. If the palace finds out, they'll shut it down before it starts." Within 24 hours, arrangements were made. Using a pseudonym, William boarded a private jet to Australia. Only 3 people knew the real purpose of his trip. When he arrived in Sydney, the air was warm and salty, a sharp contrast to the gloom he'd left behind. The investigator had already arranged a discreet meeting, a local conference where Daniel Reeves was scheduled to give a talk on cardiovascular ethics. William sat in the back row, wearing a cap and glasses. The moment Daniel took the stage, his breath caught. The resemblance was undeniable. It wasn't just physical, it was something deeper. The posture, the gestures, the quiet sincerity in his tone. The same presence Diana carried whenever she spoke from the heart. Daniel spoke with passion about dignity in life-saving medicine, about how every patient deserves humanity before heroics. It was the kind of thing Diana herself might have said. The audience applauded warmly. unaware that history was quietly colliding with itself in that very room. When the talk ended, William followed him discreetly through the crowd and finally approached near the exit. "Dr. Reeves?" Daniel turned, polite but cautious. "Yes. I wanted to thank you for your lecture," William said, forcing his voice to stay calm. "It meant a lot." The young doctor smiled faintly. "I'm glad. Are you visiting from the UK?" "Yes," William said. "And you? You were born there, weren't you?" Daniel looked curious. "Actually, I was. But I don't know much about it. Adopted as a baby. Never met my biological parents." William nodded slowly. "Do you ever wonder about them?" Daniel chuckled softly. "Sometimes. My parents told me I was born in France and that the